The New York Times claims that President Donald Trump engaged in criminal tax schemes in the 1990s. If this is true, why has the response from the public been so muted to such a shocking revelation? And a week after China's tax authorities made public its investigation into a famous actress's tax evasion, stars are asking to come clean about their recent tax status. What will be the fallout for China's film and entertainment industry? Welcome to The Point, live from Beijing. I'm Li Xin. The New York Times published a report last week which claims that President Trump and his family engaged in legally dubious business practices and criminal tax schemes in the 1990s. 3 reporters reviewed more than 100,000 pages of financial documents, including bank statements, financial audits, cash disbursement reports, and cancelled checks. They included more than 200 tax returns from the president's father and all the family partnerships and trusts. The NYT says that, among other things, the Trumps established a sham company used to hide gifts of millions of dollars and also undervalued properties. It even goes as far as to say that these tax schemes included instances of outright fraud. All in all, the president's parents transferred $1 billion to their children that could have produced a tax bill of at least $550 million under the 55% tax rate on gifts and inheritance that was in place at the time. But using a variety of tax dodges, the Trumps paid only about 5% tax instead. So what has been the fallout from this damning report, and will it have a detrimental effect on the Trump presidency itself? Joining me for the discussion from New York is Ian Reifowitz, a professor of history at the Sunny Empire State College, and here in Beijing, Professor Rick Dunham, a former White House correspondent and also director of the Global Business Program at Tsinghua University. Welcome to the show, gentlemen. Professor Reifowitz, let me go to you first. Now, much of the material investigated was already in the public domain, but an awful lot was not. So I guess one of the first questions that springs to mind is, how on earth did the NYT get hold of all of these documents, which which President Trump has been very careful not to make public up to now?
Well, I don't think the reporters have given away all their secrets, but from what I understand, the trail began because President Trump's sister, who is a federal judge, had to file some financial disclosure forms, I believe back in 1999, when she was being considered for a federal judgeship. And there was a note on that form of some income that she received from a corporation. I think it's called the All County Company or something along those lines. And that sparked the interest of reporters who began looking into it. And it's this All County that, to me, is really the worst and most egregious of the frauds. And some of it really is fraud. I mean, because what Fred Trump was doing was he set up this corporation, this All County Corporation. He would have the All County Corporation purchase materials for his building, and then he would pay All County for the materials. It was essentially a middleman. But he would pay the All County Corporation inflated prices for those materials, giving the All County Corporation an artificial profit. The owners of the All County Corporation were his children. So this was one among many ways, but this is essentially a way of giving gifts to one's children disguised as business profits. There were no profits. There was nothing added. That's an outright scam. So I believe that's how they got their entry point.
Well, before we talk about more details, what is shocking is also the response to this investigation, which has appeared to be surprisingly muted. Professor Dunham, of course, in the past few weeks, the U.S. media have been consumed by the Kavanaugh Supreme Court nomination hearings. But are you surprised by the response so far?
I am a bit surprised because it is such a blockbuster report. But I think there are a couple of good reasons. One is there's generalized Trump fatigue. There have been so many scandals. It's almost every week, and sometimes every day there's a new scandal, and people can't absorb it all. The second is this is a very complicated report. Financial investigations, investigative reporting is not easy to understand, and so it's harder for people to grasp than if there's something that's simple or simpler, like an issue of sexual indiscretion. Exactly.
Yeah.
And the third thing is, I think Donald Trump has done something smart, which is that he's ignored it. If he engaged, if he tweeted about it, it would make it an easy story for everyone. Right now, other newspapers, other news organizations can't copy it because they don't have the 100,000 pages of data. And so Donald Trump is smart that he has not pointed toward the story and given it extra attention.
Professor Rayfowitz, the investigation reviewed that Trump and his family created tax dodges, including the creation of a sham corporation to disguise millions of dollars in gifts from their parents. But is this actually fraud rather than just clever accounting? I mean, how serious is such an act?
Well, I'm not a tax lawyer by any stretch of the imagination, or any other kind of lawyer for that matter. I can barely do my own taxes. But having said that, the New York Times reporters used words in their story like outright fraud that they are hesitant to use unless they mean it. And you know, some of the things that I've already mentioned, for example, you know, adding to the cost of an item artificially is fraud. You're lying when you say that something cost costs $100 and you say it costs $200. That's a lie. So that's the definition of fraud. So it suggests, at least to me, that those are lies. Some of the other things about valuations of real estate properties may be more complicated than that. But I would rely on the New York Times, if at least to the people that they have lawyers who review these articles before they get published. If they're going to call it fraud, it suggests at least that it approaches the level of fraud. But ultimately, that's something that's going to be determined by government authorities. These are serious charges, though, and they'll be more serious when government authorities look at them.
Yeah, Professor Dunham, what's your view on this? I mean, in the article, the reference was made to outright fraud having been committed. To the layman, is there a clear-cut distinction between legally reducing one's liability and fraud?
Well, to the layman, there may not be a distinction, but legally, yes. I mean, fraud means you've broken the law. There's a difference between tax avoidance and tax evasion. And there's also a difference I have a slightly different point of view about the real estate transactions, because if you sign one form to the city claiming a low value because you want to pay less property taxes, but then another high value somewhere else because you want to sell it for more, you could have some legal liability there. I mean, if you're claiming two contradictory things at once. So I think there are a lot of issues of potential legal liability, but in this case, really, only a court can conclude if it is a crime or if it's just something unethical.
Yeah, but what does it say that the reporters actually are calling this fraud? They're not saying someone says this is fraud or it looks like fraud, but they're calling it outright with the word outright.
To me, this is extraordinary. I was a reporter in Washington for 29 years. I did a lot of investigative reporting. I never accused someone of outright violating the law. You're very careful in your wording. You quote people saying this may be fraud. You let the readers reach their own conclusions. So to me, they're out on a limb. But I think in one way, they believe Donald Trump will never sue them. And if he sues them, they'll ask for more documents that he doesn't want to give up. So I think they're taking a chance, but they're very confident in their conclusions, very confident.
So they must have, sufficient evidence to back up their claim. So many would argue, however, that much of this report highlights what very many wealthy Americans also do, that is to reduce their tax liabilities, basically everywhere else. And as Trump's lawyers noted, the Internal Revenue Service, or IRS, appears to have approved all of Trump family tax returns at the time, albeit that they have said they will now re-examine his tax affairs in light of this report. So, Professor Rayfowitz, it would appear that many of these transactions were clearly legal. Why is anyone questioning it all now? Does it just smack of political digging for dirt?
No, I don't think it does. That would assume that the New York Times is out to get Donald Trump for political reasons. I think the fact that the New York Times is investigating the President of the United States is nothing new. They investigated Bill Clinton as president to a degree that certainly rivals, if not exceeds, what they're doing here with Donald Trump. They spent years investigating Whitewater. They were very supportive of a Republican president's push for war in the early 2000s. So I think, you know, it's one thing for conservatives to say that the New York Times is against them, but the record does not indicate that. I think what we can say is that there are ways to reduce one's taxes if you have a fancy enough lawyer, but there is also things that go beyond just reducing one's taxes. When you present false figures to the government, it may not be the easiest thing for the government. You know, if the federal government doesn't have access, and Professor Dunham mentioned this, doesn't have access to some of the local forms that you've submitted to local tax authorities, you know, that you need to have a full investigation where one person has eyes on all of the different areas, and maybe that just wasn't done. I also understand that gift taxes are often not scrutinized the same way that estate taxes are. So there are lots of different ways to hide things, and just because it got through the first time doesn't mean it was legal.
Yeah, Professor Dunham, what's your take there? You were nodding. Do you think this was political or not?
Well, the New York Times is critical of Donald Trump, but that doesn't mean that its reporting is necessarily biased. Just because something is critical doesn't mean that it's untrue or unfair. But I do believe that the wording in this is as strong as I have seen in any investigative reporting of a public official on financial matters.
Okay, the most stinging aspect of this report might be its assertion that Trump received at least $413 million from his father's real estate empire over the years, calling into question Trump's personal branding as a self-made building baron. But Trump has been accused of uttering so many falsehoods during his presidency. Is this going to make any further damage to his credibility, Professor Rafowitz?
Well, we won't know until, I think, really 2020. I think that the midterm elections are not directly on Trump's character. They're maybe on Trump's presidency and his conduct as president, but I don't think that they're going to affect the midterm elections too much. But it's different if you have in 2020 a Democratic nominee who's hammering these issues. The American people have heard a lot of things about Trump, but for many of them, this is a report in a newspaper until, as Professor Dunham says, a court rules on it. They're not going to necessarily take it seriously. Those who already feel negatively towards him are going to have this, it's going to reinforce their opinions, and those who aren't sure are going to take a wait-and-see approach. At least that's how I see it. But 2020 is where we're really going to see whether or not this has an impact.
Yeah, Professor Dunham, I have about 1 minute left. Some Democrats have said they want more transparency, that they would, if they take control of the House after the midterm elections, they will use the authority of the Ways and Means Committee to commandeer taxpayers' records for a confidential review. How likely is that going to happen? Should it happen?
First, I think it's about 100% likely. Donald Trump's refused to release his tax records. They will subpoena the tax records. There will be a huge court fight. They will go to the Supreme Court, which is now a 5-4 Trump majority, and we'll see what happens. I mean, I think they have every right to do that, and it's something that would be in the public interest. The question is what the result will be when it goes to the Supreme Court.
Okay. We have to leave it there. Many thanks to Ian Rafowitz, a professor of history at Sunny Empire State College, and here in Beijing, Professor Rick Dunham. And you have been watching The Point with me, Liu Xin. As always, we're going to take a short break, and when I come back, we'll continue looking at tax evasion, but this time closer to home, at the heart of China's film and entertainment industry. Stay with me. Starting today, China's State Taxation Administration is launching a campaign to regulate tax payment in the film and TV industry. This came a week after China's tax authorities made public the results of an investigation into a tax evasion case by a famous actress, Fan Bingbing. The case is seen as one of the largest of its kind in years. The actress was ordered to pay taxes and fines worth some $130 million, and she will face criminal investigation if she fails to comply on time. In addition, the local taxation bureau in eastern China's Wuxi was criticized and called out for rectification. Relevant officials were given administrative sanctions of warning and record of demerits. Now, since late June this year, China's tax authorities have carried out a sector-wide overhaul of unreasonably high casting fees, contract fraud, and tax evasion. The new campaign, which starts today, will include 4 phases. The first step is self-correction and examination, and December the 31st is the deadline for companies and individuals in the industry to voluntarily declare and pay previously evaded taxes from 2016 to date. Now, those that come clean will not face administrative punishment or fines. Next phases are supervision, inspection into key firms, and summarizing progress in July 2019. So what can be learned from this case so far, and how will the campaign shape the future health of the entertainment industry? I'm joined by current affairs commentator Aina Tangen and Han Hua Fellow at the Chongyang Institute of Renmin University of China. Before we start our discussion, let's take a look at this package first.
Fan Bingbing must pay more than 250 million yuan in taxes and another 33 million yuan in late fees. That's a combined total of around 42 million US dollars. The A-list movie star was also fined an additional 480 million yuan, or around 70 million US dollars. The actress who starred in such Hollywood movies as X-Men, Days of Future Past, had been found to use so-called Yin-Yang Contracts to underreport her earnings. Fan Bingbing's film Unbreakable Spirit, for example, saw the actress dodging more than $1 million US in taxes.
Okay, welcome to my guests, and I guess much has been said about this case. We're not going into the details here, but we're looking at the new campaign that is coming as a result of this investigation. My question first to Aina, perhaps, why is the first phase of the new campaign, which starts today, self-correction? I mean, is there something Chinese here? Why don't the officials just launch an in-house correction or ask for acronymous tips?
Well, I think when they realize the scope of what's involved here, and it's not just these individuals. I mean, remember, there are about 40 internationally recognized famous stars who've had some crossover, 10 of whom have done it. But these are soft power icons, which can be very useful to Beijing and China in terms of expressing the true nature of the country. So it's not just as simple as saying, oh, well, let's get the taxes from these people. There has been laxness in the past in regards to taxes, not only in this industry, but in many industries. And I think what you're seeing here is a newfound decision by the party and the government that they are going to collect what is owed to the government.
Han Hua, what is your take on this question? Why is the first phase a call on these stars to come clean themselves, and those who will comply will be exempt from punishment?
In my opinion, the self-correction and the in-house check, as well as the supervision, watchdog supervision, should be conducted simultaneously. There should not necessarily to be phase 1 or phase 2 because it's owed to the government, and the nature or the essence of a citizen, a good citizen, to abide by the law of tax, whatever the individual law of tax or the corporate income tax law, is to do the self-correction and to learn the knowledge of the tax, the basic knowledge of the tax, as well as to do the tax submission. And also for the watchdog, for the regulatory government agencies, they should at the same time to do the check on a daily basis.
Well, according to what we know, there is a deadline, which is December 31st of this year, for all of these so-called all of these stars to come clean, and before something else is going to happen to them. But anyway, what, Aina, do you think could be the estimate of the amount of taxes that can be collected, late taxes, let's say, that can be collected by that deadline? My question really is how much hidden profit there could be, how systematic is this within the industry?
Well, there could be a tremendous amount depending on how clean people want to come and whether they want to roll the dice on this. And this is not just limited to the stars themselves. I mean, movie accounting is famous. I mean, there's some big blockbuster movies like Star Wars, the first episode. I don't think it ever made a dime, despite being the highest grossing film in history. These types of things can be quite difficult, and it's kind of like trying to trap water in a sieve, because there's so many different ways to get money in and out, consulting contracts, there's advertising, there's so many different ways. So I think what the government is doing here is just sending a very strong message. Look, no matter how high or how low you are, you must pay your taxes. I mean, just recently they reformed the tax situation. They doubled basically the amount that you can earn without having to pay taxes. But it means that China is maturing. It does need to have a tax basis. Local governments need to be able to provide the services that people want, and that means that people have to pay their taxes.
Yeah.
And if you're a star, that applies to you as well.
Right. However, according to some recent reports, there are two things that the Chinese public have a particular anger against. One is the skyrocketing casting fees. These stars, they're not just getting a few million, they're getting tens of millions in Chinese, that which equals to also millions of US dollars, tens of millions of US dollars sometimes. And the fact that they use two contracts. One is the Yin contract, which is the one that's hidden, nobody sees, and then there's the Yang contract, which they publicly declare their tax on. So is there a difference between the Chinese practices and the those in the West who are getting huge amount of money, for instance, movie stars or sports stars, Han Hua?
I think there shouldn't be any difference between the China tax laws and the regulations in the Western countries. Not necessarily to mean the different industries or entertainment industry should be put into the spotlight. Every good citizen needs to abide by the individual nations' the tax laws. So there shouldn't be.
But my question really was, why were these stars getting such high casting fees legitimately or reasonably? Why were people so angry about it? I mean, as we said, foreign stars also get a very high salary. Aina, if you want to jump in.
If I can chime in, yeah, they're not doing anything differently, except to the point where they're not declaring their income. As a Chinese citizen, she's required to pay income on her worldwide income, and if she didn't disclose that second contract, that is tax evasion. All the perks and everything else that she received that people got very upset about, these are, weird, but they're very, very common in the industry. In fact, there are lawyers who do nothing except contracts on what they call all these extras. And this is just part of the kind of weirdness that is part of this industry. But no, they're not actually doing anything wrong. Many of the actors in the United States will come up with very, very creative ways to have their production companies, which they own solely, paid a large chunk of money because they're going to use it for another project. They'll sometimes.
So basically, you're saying this is a common problem facing tax administrators.
It's not a problem because they end up paying. They end up paying taxes on it. The issue here is she showed only one contract, or the allegation is she only showed one contract. She did not show the other contract.
Well, the reason why she showed only one contract is because she only wanted to pay a certain amount a lower amount of tax, right? Otherwise, she would show the entire contract. Anyway, let's move on to the problem of oversight. As I said, the State Administration of Taxation has demanded that its Jiangsu branch investigate all the officers involved in Fan's case, saying they need to be held accountable. So, Han Hua, how common is this a problem of inadequate oversight? Has there been progress? What still needs to be done?
To tell the truth, to be frankly, this is very common in my opinion. I think there are several reasons to make up for the root cause of this kind of phenomenon. First is the local tax officers, or probably just the tax officers, their lack of adequate knowledge and skill sets to deal with the creative ways of hiding the income or the other profits from the balance sheet. The second reason, just like the other government agencies, the corruption also lies with the tax bureaus, especially in some local branches, if I may say so. So they cooperate, quote unquote, with this other side, the celebrities, to try to hide the income tax from the tax laws. Yeah. The third reason is that the local government interests, that in the past years we see that many local governments, in order to develop or boost their GDP, they try to come up with many creative local regulations to help the celebrities or the big corporations to evade from the tax.
Yeah, so that they go
from
there,
the nation's national level at the price of the nation's tax income.
Right. So now that these finally surfaced, as people say, the tip of the iceberg is being addressed, and still you have to address the bulk of the problem. What's going to happen to the entertainment industry when it comes to tax? Aina, what kind of impact is this going to have, and is such a campaign going to make a fundamental difference?
Well, I don't know that it'll make a difference. There's just too many ways. I was a lawyer. I can tell you there's just so many ways that you can restructure contracts in different ways. It's going to be very, very difficult. They've imposed some rules where they say that on a production, only 70% of the production can be used for talent, and only 40% on any one talent in the cast. They can do that, but there's just too many ways to do it. I think in the end they'll continue to make sure that these big stars are not getting away with too much, but it's going to be very difficult.
Yeah, Han Hua, what do you think will be the impact of this case on the film and entertainment industry in general?
Yeah, I think in the long run it will be helpful with this tax evasion case to be cracking down. It will be positive or helpful towards a more healthy development towards the entertainment industry in China, because you look at the balance sheet now, the P&L, the cost, the actors' salaries counting for the majority part of that. Comparatively speaking, even the Hollywood, they have creative ways in coming up with a balanced balance sheet. So I think the producers, the directors, the other staff contributing to a TV drama or movie, they should be attributed to more or given or distributed more cost in this regard. So I think in the long run, the entertainment industry will be running a more balanced way of income.
Good, good. That's good news. That's something positive that might come out of this incident. Anyway, many thanks to Aina Tangen and Han Hua. And with that, we come to the end of this edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin. As always, follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle The Point with LX. Download the application called CGTN to watch the show on your mobile devices, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. Thanks for watching. You've got The Point.